Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is now 5 past the hour and we are going to start our session. Just a reminder to everybody that this session is being recorded and you will be able to get access to a copy of the recording. So I want to take a moment to welcome you all to today's session. So today it's another session in our ongoing webinar series about thriving, not just surviving. We're going to be focusing today on going digital and the fact that it's not just for quarantine. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce myself and my colleague Ben and get us started. So my name is Oliver Castling and I'm the Director of Client Engagement here in Singapore for GP Strategies. And today I've got with me Ben Keir. He's our Managing Director for APAC Learning Solutions. And both of us have a special interest in digital learning. Ben, did you want to say a few words? You're muted, Ben.
Guys, those of you who joined us, I think it was a few weeks ago now, we had a session on virtual instructor-led design. And, you know, in this session, we're going to be zooming out to talk about digital more broadly and about digital not being a stopgap measure. So I'm super excited. And I guess my role in this conversation is that my background is actually leadership, employee engagement, professional development. You know, I've designed courses, classroom trainings, delivered, managed large projects around soft skills and professional development. And these have traditionally been the domain of classroom learning, right? Skills development, mindset shift has often been the domain of high-touch, live facilitated events. And, you know, there's been a lot of innovation there. And because of the role that I have at GP and what our team has at GP, we've kind of been in the forefront of this convergence of new and emerging digital technologies and, you know, learning that is highly complex and typically the domain of more traditional methods of learning. So, you know, I'm really excited to be here today, and that's, I guess, the story that Oliver and I are bringing to this conversation is, you know, working with partners and dealing with many of the challenges that come up along that way. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm super excited to share some of our experience and learning, and hope that it helps you guys make better decisions moving forward and have really, really effective learning.
Great, thanks, Ben. And so as Ben has mentioned, today we're going to be going through an overview of digital, looking at both the benefits but also the challenges. We're going to be running through some of the critical decisions around experience design, platforms and modalities, as well as how to engage learners across digital. We're also going to use a real-life example because we know that a lot of this stuff can get quite theoretical. So excited to dive into some real-life examples from our experience. And then we're going to allow plenty of time for Q&A. One of the things that we found during our webinar sessions is it's almost impossible for us to get through all of the questions. So we're leaving a lot of time for that, but also any questions that are unanswered by the end, we do try to do a bit of a roundup and include in our messaging to you guys after the session. So if your question doesn't get answered, don't worry. We will be making sure that you do get an answer to that question, even if it isn't live on today's session. So just a quick overview of the tool that we're using today. We're using WebEx events today. Now, one of the things that I want to make clear about us as an organization and a team is that we're technology agnostic. We do not own or have any vested interest in the tools that we're using. We have chosen the WebEx events tool because it's a great way to manage this large format broadcast type of webinar. Although we have experience across a wide range of learning technologies, one of the things we're going to discuss today is how do you actually choose the right tool for the job. The problem is when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So today I'm going to introduce you to the tool. Now, you are already muted. If we were a smaller group, we would give you the authorization to mute and unmute your audio. But I see that we've got over 124 participants on today's call. So all of your audio is muted, but that doesn't mean you can't get engaged in today's session. And I'll be showing you how to do that as we go through a couple of these slides. So one of the main ways you can get involved in the conversation is to join in at the bottom of the screen in the chat panel. Now, for some of you that are using a mobile device, or perhaps you've got a slightly different screen layout, do look for that little speech bubble at the bottom of the screen to jump in to the chat. Please do make sure, as you can see on your screen right now, that for the to item of the chat, you select all participants or all panelists. So all participants will be everybody who's in the room. All panelists will be Ben and myself and our GP team who's sitting up in the panelist box managing today's session. So do jump into the chat. I see a lot of you have already found that. Now, as we go through, we're going to ask you to get involved in a few different ways other than just the chat. This is to keep it interesting, but also because there are different tools for different jobs. One of the ways that we will be doing this is to annotating on the screen. So Ben, as he leads us through today's session, will be asking you to drop a pin or perhaps annotate, highlight, maybe even drop some text, and you can do so through the annotation bar. Additionally, we'll be asking you to answer polls, and we will be letting you know when we launch those polls, and they might be as simple as the one that's on the screen today, which is what is the weather like in your area. You click one of the boxes and then hit submit, and your answer will be put together with all of the others, and then we'll be able to feed back. So some useful tools that we'll be using today.
And I just want to point out, team, that the annotations may be hidden for you, so you've got to keep an eye out for this squiggly line here, which will really help, which will bring up your annotation options such as drop a pin and the text type. They're the two options we'll be using today. So, maybe we can do that right now, Oliver.
Excellent. So everybody who is on today's session, try and find your annotation tool, maybe on the left of your screen, look for that squiggly line. Those on mobile or iPad, it may be in one of your buttons at the bottom of the screen. Do look for the three dots for more options to find that. And then I'd like you to select the drop pin tool. So do have a look through, look for the arrow, click on the arrow, and you can drop in where are you today. So I'm down here in Sri Lanka. We can see some folks. I can see a South Africa already there from Antonio. See quite a few folks in Australia today. And we've got a Kiwi with us as well. Some folks in China. Malaysia. I see Singapore. In fact, Singapore now is a sea of
Thailand.
Folks.
Someone staying up very late in that looks
US.
Like Quebec or like northern side of North America.
Really testing our geography skills here, aren't we, Ben?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a blotchy image, isn't it? I'll have to put out more.
Yeah. Well,
so that's far up north, yeah.
Hopefully makes it forgivable if we don't know quite the country people in. I can see some Japan and Korea up there, a few more
Someone
folks.
in North Africa as well, or if that was the right pin drop. I can see
relocated.
Some familiar faces popping up. So guys, you know where the annotations are now. We will ask you to use them at different times. So keep an eye out for that and an ear out for that.
Great.
So shall we get started?
Let's move on.
Okay. So first of all, we've already said hello, but I just want to thank everyone for your time today. I just want to get one thing straight from the start, and that is, we intentionally, yes, GP Strategies is a service provider, and, we provide all sorts of different, services around performance and design and training. But we work very hard to make sure these sessions are not aren't salesy, right? We really thought, in the spirit of everything going on with the virus and everyone's businesses are being hit, including ours, that we want to make sure that these are genuinely valuable insights into things that you can go and do. You don't need to necessarily call us back to say, how do I do that? We want to give you, look, we can't teach everything in a 1-hour webinar, but we want to try to give enough of a mindset shift, enough of a new way of thinking and some approaches that you can follow that you can make better decisions as an organization, and so that's really what we're trying to focus on here. But because of this topic being so broad, right, we're talking about modern digital learning broadly, and anyone who's dabbled in that knows that there's so many different elements to it, so many different platforms, so many different approaches, so many different technologies. There's so much out there, but I just want to kind of say, so I'm changing there. We got where everyone is. Why is it that we're in a position to talk about this in the first place? So yes, we have a lot of individuals developing various forms of learning, whether it's classroom or digital or virtual, and have been doing that for over 60 years, but 15 years, especially in the digital space, 15 or 20 years. But that's not really the key part I'm trying to address here. The big thing for us is that, is that one of the areas that GP operates is in managing learning for other businesses. So large banks, technology companies, automotive companies, manufacturing companies, pharmaceutical companies. We partner at a really deep level to manage learning for these organizations. So that means that we're not coming in and saying, hey, here is our platform, or hey, here is our content. Sometimes that happens, right? And we do engage with clients at that level as well. But what we end up finding ourselves in a position of is a client saying, hey, GP, we have just invested in success factors, and we've bought LinkedIn Learning, and we also have Degreed, or we have none of these things, and we need to initiate this learning project. We need to move the needle in this way. Can you please reach out to this specific vendor, or can you please help us research different vendors that could bring together the content, the learning outcomes, the technology, or whatever it might be, to make it successful? And so Oliver mentioned this earlier, we're content agnostic and we're platform agnostic. So we're really in this kind of somewhat unique position of being able to have really good conversations that enable us to effectively, talk about the convergence of those things from a very neutral perspective. So that's kind of why we're here. And then especially, I told you my story earlier that we've been, because of our background, the team that you're dealing with today, Oliver and I, our focus on content areas that have traditionally been the domain of classroom, we've had some very challenging projects that we've had really good success with. So that's kind of why we're here today to talk about it. But enough about why we're here, or why we have the credibility to be in front of you today. Let's start with a little bit of a poll. So here is going to be our first poll, and you'll see that it'll open up on the right-hand side. Which do you think, for developing skills and changing mindsets? So traditionally, where have you gone if you want to develop people's skills or change mindsets or entrenched behaviors? Do you typically go to live classroom and virtual training, or do you go to self-led digital or online training? Where has been the domain for skills development, changing mindsets, moving people's behaviors in a new direction? So you can select A or B in the poll. If you're on an iPad, it'll be behind the more options, the 3 dots, and you'll find polling in there. And we're going to leave it open for a little bit. I'll leave it open for another 30 seconds.
Yeah, and they may have received a pop-up to ask them to complete the poll as well. And I can see that we've already had over half of the people getting started on that poll. So we're seeing some really good numbers here. That's still going on. And once again, that is traditionally developing skills and changing mindsets. What have you gone to? Live classroom and perhaps virtual trainings, or self-led digital or online learning? So we'll keep the poll open for a little bit longer. While we do that, I can see that we're getting a great number of responses, and I can already see a trend coming out from our poll. So
let's close that poll in 5 more seconds, conscious of time.
Yep. So Sue, when you're ready, please close the poll, and we'll be able to share the results with everybody here.
Okay, so these results should come up in just a couple of seconds. We're just waiting for some people to finish the submit button.
Well, I can give you a sneak preview, Ben, and I can see that we had about a little over 70% of respondents who have said live classroom and virtual training, and about 20% that have gone for self-led digital.
Right.
Okay.
And then, we can see the results up there now. Yeah, right. We had a few people not answer, and just for the 39 who didn't answer, I want you to know that I'm watching you guys. You've got to get you involved. All right. So let's have a little talk about the results here. So look, I'm not surprised about that, and honestly, if you had have spoken to me maybe 3 or 4 years ago, because my whole world was designing and delivering learning to to meet these types of issues, changing mindsets, changing behaviors, developing skills. I would have gone the same way too. And if I think about not just, the leadership space, but I think about like the automotive industry in a dealership when you're training, mechanics on how to do things, or product training or sales training, or if I'm in the banking industry and I'm, thinking about compliance training, and it's not just the compliance I'm trying to train, it's also the mindset of compliance that I'm trying to change. So there's a few different areas. I just want to confirm, can everyone see the poll? I got a few people saying that they're not seeing the poll. Hopefully you guys can see the results. But anyway, we've told you the results, which is that the majority picking live classroom. So our mission today is to kind of show you a pathway that you can actually achieve the same or better results that you may have achieved just by focusing on traditional forms of classroom and virtual training. And I wouldn't have been able to say this is true for some time ago. For some time, it's only been more recently that that this has come up. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about that. So guys, we're going to now switch to another little interaction, another question. So we're going to talk about digital. And before I do that, let's talk about what digital is. So in the chat, you can minimize the poll function or close that off for now. We'll reopen that when the next one comes up. So in your chat window, right, all participants, when I say digital, what word or words come to mind when you think of digital learning? Not digital anything, digital learning, I should be more clear. So go ahead, punch into the chat, and let's have a look and see what you guys are saying.
So we have electronic or e-learning, Ben. We've got using the internet, distance learning, speed of learning, webinars, online training, at my own pace, one of the answers there.
Yeah, e-learning
says online. We have AI as one there. Self-paced trainings. I apologize that I'm not signing names to this. It's hard to read them as they're coming in thick and fast.
We've got discussions via platforms, machine learning, smartboard learning. We've got PowerPoint presentations online. I think that's a common one a lot of people may have experienced.
Online adaptive learning, Ben, which is something that's close to our own hearts as well, although a challenging one to implement well. A lot on self-directed, using various different tools.
We've got
technology savvy.
Multiple modalities.
We've got this one, Ben.
Yeah, fit theory only. Fit theory only is something that I want to call out here. Yeah, traditionally, you've used online learning, especially when we're talking about e-learning. People have gone to e-learning for knowledge sharing. Hey, here is this thing I need you to remember. Or I'm going to broadcast this message about a compliance piece or an HR onboarding tool. So it's typically been very theoretical. Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people think and feel. But we have got a diverse mix of responses. Thank you so much for sharing, guys. So look, I think what we're seeing here is the full gamut of learning maturity, right? A lot of people, when they think of digital, a lot of people, and not just those of you on this session, but your internal customers, maybe your stakeholders, your learners, when they're thinking about learning, there's a big percentage of people, their experience of digital is e-learning, or maybe virtual training, or a combination of both. At best, sometimes it might be a little bit blended, where I might have some e-learning or something online to complete before I go to a classroom training, right? And so that's where a lot of people's minds revolve around. And then you add an extra layer to that for a lot of learners in our marketplace, the frontline, individual contributors, frontline managers. Most of their experience of digital learning has been fairly dry, right? It's been a compliance training or some mandatory training that I have to complete, right? But then I'm also seeing comments that are kind of more progressive beyond that point of view. But we have to acknowledge that initial point of view, because if you are on this call and you're a developer of learning, or you're a learning professional or an HR professional, or you're in the delivery side, you need to be aware that there is resistance out there because people are not at necessarily the same point of view that all of us have, right? And so then you progress from there and you move into some of these other words that I'm seeing: multiple modalities, self-directed, social or discussions, that the design process is intensive. I can see Georgia said, I totally agree with that, and that's some of the things we're going to talk about. So let's get a common definition of digital. Now, I'm sorry, but we had some issues and I can't show you. I had this all animated, so you're going to get flooded with a bit of information that I would have rather reveal piece by piece. But here we've got, a lot of different things on the screen. We have, maybe like traditional e-learning here. We've got gamification. You've got virtual instructor-led training, videos and media, classroom training, one-on-one coaching on the job, social and connections and communities and peer coaching and support, checklists, assessment, on-the-job tools, user-generated content sharing, mobile learning, all of these, including classroom training, for us is digital, right? So what digital really is, it's a way to create a backbone, or it's a platform that brings together all the modalities of learning in a way that just simply wasn't possible before. And where does it take that? It takes it into the job. So digital, when we speak about, classroom versus digital, if you're using technology correctly, if you're designing appropriately, if you're listening to your learners and listening to your business, which is really what we're going to talk about, what you're going to find is that you're able to bring together all of these things and make them more effective. So now, instead of just going to a classroom and my LMS telling me I've got to complete this e-learning, it's possible to blend all of these things together to stretch the learning over an extended period of time, or a never-ending period of time, an open learning experience. But it's not necessarily easy, and that's kind of what we're going to address. So that's what our common definition of digital is. It's a way to bring multiple modalities of learning, including live and instructor-led learning, and bringing it together with all sorts of other assets and modalities to embed learning where learners work. Right? That's what the mission is of modern digital learning. And there are some characteristics of digital learning. It can be micro learning. It has to be ruthlessly relevant. It should be easy to access and consume. I shouldn't have to trudge up a big mountain to just get one piece of content. It's typically self-led, right? So yes, there might be some instructor-led elements, but overall, the digital learning ecosystem should be something that I drive myself. It may involve curated content. No longer do I have to always go and buy IP, although sometimes that's relevant, right? But you have the capacity to curate content from multiple sources and bring it into the view of the learner. It's social, right? I'm connected with people in ways that I wasn't connected before, right? Outside of the classroom. It's supported. So, we're not going to talk a lot about this today, but one of the big things that's happening here is that the role of learners and learning organizations, the roles are changing, right? So whereas you may have had a learning administrator before who is sending out schedules and emails, that still happens, but now you might have a role of a learner engagement specialist or a moderator, or a facilitator is now evolving from being a facilitator to being a digital coach, right? But it is supported, right? Even though I'm self-led, I may be on a bus on my phone completing learning, I am also supported and connected to people and to other learners. It's also should be sticky. It needs to be sticky. It needs to be diverse and kind of fun. And most importantly, it needs to be pervasive, meaning it's not just something I attend at one time or another. It's something that is present for me every day, all the time. And so I kind of want to address another here. Why is this important? Why is this so important? Well, let's talk about the benefits of digital, because the benefits of digital are speaking to what our businesses need today. So if you do it right, and there's lots and lots of ways to do it. There's horses for courses. You might have a need to train engineers or mechanics, or you might have a need to train your leaders, or you might have a need to train your entire organization on something. Different situations, different learners, different outcomes will demand different approaches, right? But if done right, you have the capacity to bring all of the modalities of learning together and increase their overall effectiveness. So now, instead of a classroom by itself or an e-learning by itself, if I can blend it together with other components and make that journey more significant for the user, then each of the individual components are stronger together. Learning can be stretched and consumed in manageable doses. One of the big reasons why I jumped into getting so deep into digital, despite being centered around designing and delivering more classroom training, is because I know that A lot of learning is like being hit over the head with a baseball bat. You just smashed with a huge amount of content over 1 day, 2 days, or 120 minutes of e-learning. And we're expecting people to take all of that in and then go back to work and then figure out that what they're going to deploy from the morning of day one, the afternoon of day two, the morning of day, and spread it all out and figure out how to do it. And the reality is it doesn't happen. That's where I come from. I was sick of developing learning, but I knew the learning by itself was effective. People were demonstrating and role-playing certain behaviors or demonstrating certain knowledge by the end of that learning session. But I knew in my heart of hearts, when they went back to work, they probably weren't necessarily executing on them because they were busy or because there was just too much for the mind to retain. So now we can stretch it out and give the learning and the action and reflection adequate space to execute on the job. There is significantly higher I've got a typo there, a significantly higher chance of long-term change and retention, which then helps us get down the bottom here, stronger ROI. Your organization and its employees can be more agile and responsive to change. So part of digital learning is about changing the learning culture. If I would like all of you to reflect for a moment, just stop and think for a second about your last moment of learning. All right? And I don't want you to think about last time you were in a classroom or the last time you're on an e-learning. Think about the last time you wanted to cook something at home and you popped onto YouTube or some video platform to watch a video, or you needed to fix something at home, or someone asked you a question and you didn't know the answer. What you did is you picked up your phone probably, and you did a quick search, maybe even a voice search, and you sought that information. And you cut out everything else on the internet until you found the one single thing that was important to you. So that's agile learning, right? You learned, you had something you wanted to solve, and you went and you took action and you did it yourself, right? So how can you create that same learning culture that exists outside of work, inside of work? If you can create that, right, and digital learning can help with that if designed right, you can create an agile learning organization where learners aren't necessarily waiting to be told to learn. They are learning when they need it. And that's a huge mindset shift for a lot of organizations and the learners. And we'll talk about some of the challenges inherent in making that shift a bit later on. You can reach larger populations who typically didn't receive this type of learning. So let's be honest, a lot of learning, not all of it, like product training, you've got to train it to all of your people. Systems training, all the relevant individuals have to receive that. Compliance training, again, the same. But, developmental training, leadership training, communication skills development, some of those critical skills that our businesses need more than ever, because they've been so costly and time consuming, you could only train 30 people or 20 people at a time in a classroom. You could only have budget and time and space to give that to your high potentials or to your top leaders. And so those huge segments of our business, 80%, 70%, the middle of the bell curve of our populations that didn't receive learning. Or at least didn't receive some of the developmental learning. And then that jaded their opinion of what learning at work meant. So, you can really achieve really big impact now across large populations if you're designing it right. And then the last one is, now you have the ability to capture data and analytics, which of course helps you measure the return on investment, but also that data and analytics can make you more agile to then adjust that learning quickly. Whereas before a classroom training, once you start that, it's up to the trainer to be agile. The content is the content. You can't change that workbook. Or that e-learning, when you spent $30,000 or $50,000 or whatever you spent developing that 90-minute or 60-minute e-learning, that's pretty fixed, and it takes time and money to really to change that, right? But if a lot of platforms and digital experiences these days, you can quickly look at the data. What are people looking at? What questions they're asking? And I can quickly drop in content. Take content out, use my moderator or my learning engagement specialist to point them to things that are extra relevant to our business today or tomorrow. So these are the benefits if you can do it right. And so really in a nutshell, why digital? Why is digital? Remember, the name of our whole session is Going Digital. It's not just for quarantine. Really, we've been embarking on modern digital learning for the last 4 years for some organizations around Asia Pac. And COVID wasn't even on the horizon. So this is what we want to get to. But there are challenges. I want to be realistic and say that you can't just click your fingers and make it happen. So back to you guys. Let's have a quick chat. in the chat window, just tell me in no more than 5 words, as briefly as you can, what do you see as the biggest challenges in going digital? Right? Digital learning we're talking about here. So go ahead.
And I just want to remind everybody, please do put it in the chat so that it's shared with everybody, not in the Q&A. So I see some messages are coming up in the Q&A panel, so please do keep it to the chat so that we can share it all there.
Yep. So I can see learner engagement is a really big challenge, changing people's mindsets, the discipline, right? A lot of people think, oh, I can't trust people to be self-led because they don't have the discipline. Well, there's an answer to that. Connectivity, yeah, look, that is a big challenge, and it's very hard to do that. If you're in the client side, yeah, convincing the client to go that way is one of our big challenges as well. Buy-in from the stakeholders, yeah, that's a massive challenge. Building those learner habits, yeah, too many distractions, yeah, depending on the modality, that can be huge. Like right now, you guys could all be very distracted because I can't see what you're doing. Funding, yeah, is a big issue. Remember, funding is only as relevant as the value in which people are thinking about funding in. So that comes back to stakeholder resistance and understanding value. Yeah, working environment. Engagement is coming up quite a few times. Yeah, investment of money, the balance of different learning connection points like mobile, PC. Commitment from learners. I noticed assessments coming up quite a lot as well. How do we actually assess people before, during, and after? Maybe make it a personalized experience. So I think that there's a lot of issues here, and I want to kind of distill. I want to distill some of the issues that you guys are addressing here: ROI, technology failure, into 3 core challenges, of which everything you're talking about feed into these. Okay. And here they are. Number 1, biggest challenges is that I go digital, but no one turns up, right? And there could be a whole bunch of reasons. Some of the things you're talking about, right? Like adaptability, change management, not picking the right platform. There's a whole bunch of different areas, lack of engagement, content relevance, lack of social connection. There's a whole bunch of reasons which we're going to address here, right? But empty platform is the number 1 challenge and the number 1 fear. Number 2 is wasted investments. I've gone and I've invested in technology and no one's turning up to it, right? So that you can see that these 3 are interconnected, right? So I've gone and I've spent X number of dollars per year on LinkedIn Learning and I'm getting less than stellar participation. Or I've put all of this content into a content library and no one's looking at it, right? And so misses the mark, right? So that's the 3rd one, where I've actually invested in some sort of digital experience, and for whatever reason, I've got too focused on the technology, and the learning that I'm actually delivering isn't achieving the result that I need it to, meaning it's not making the change, it's not developing the behaviors. So behind these 3 challenges, there are a few categories, and I'm seeing a whole bunch of comments: deciphering technology to determine a customized solution. This is the challenge, and I'll be honest, my biggest challenge that I face personally from my role of consulting with our partners is where there's a gap in understanding of what learning is, what's possible. So if I can only work with and buy what I think is possible, if I don't know what's possible out there, then I'm going to build my RFP in a certain way, or I'm going to make certain decisions that might be sabotaging me from achieving my goal, and I don't even know it yet. Right? And honestly, that's part of my personal motivation for running this webinar, is to educate everyone around, the genuine challenge. So here are the critical decisions. This is often where the challenges start from. So number 1, your critical decisions. And I put what, when, why here. I don't want to just gloss over that. What are the decisions you're making, and when you make them and why you make them are all important. So for example, if you already decide that I'm going to buy this learning platform, before you've actually gone out to decide what your learning design should be, or how am I going to engage learners, or what type of engagement is even required, then you've made a critical decision about a technology that is then going to potentially manifest these issues. So maybe wasn't the right technology to meet the learning requirements and to engage my learners. So we often are faced with a challenge where an organization has already invested in a myriad of different technologies, or 1 or 2 technologies. And there's a couple of questions coming up here that I'm going to address. But the when you've made that decision is often the biggest challenge. Is they've already kind of gone and invested and run gung ho into something, and then everyone is then from forevermore trying to shoehorn the rest of this into the into that decision, and it creates all sorts of issues. And I've got some really strong case studies that we can share about that. So what?
Ben, can I jump into one of the questions that I think is really pertinent at the moment? And this is a big hi to Jeff Ong, who's a great friend of ours. He's asked, empty platform, wasted investments, and misses the mark are also pertinent to new programs that are delivered face-to-face. What can we learn from the past to help us succeed in digital? And one of the things I want to draw back to, Ben, is when you said what is digital, and you included classroom and one-on-one face-to-face as a kind of a part of that ecosystem. And I think one of the important messages from this is these ways of deciding on modalities and learner engagement and who the learners are, what the journey looks like, are really pertinent regardless of the tools you're using. And if we include a tool like Classroom or one-on-one coaching, or a gamified learning platform, or a curated content resource, they are all, you need to take a very similar approach in deciding how to choose what tool for the job. Is that correct?
Well, let me say this. So it is a good point. Of course, this has always been relevant of learning. If I'm in a classroom and I'm delivering something that isn't relevant to the learners and they're not interested, and I'm not an engaging speaker and the activities are boring, then the modality isn't working. Maybe it's the content not working. Maybe it's the trainer not working. But yes, all of that is relevant. Why am I bringing it up so specifically now? And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. I'm going to come back to this. It's because of the characteristics of what make digital successful. And I'm going to call out several specific ones. I'm going to zoom in here. It's these characteristics: self-led, micro, pervasive, and continuous. Because this learner is not in a classroom and you can't kind of grab them and pull them through it. This person is sitting on a bus on the way to work on their phone. They choose whether or not they want to go in or not go in. They choose how much time to give and how much time to not dedicate to the learning, right? We're moving to a world of mandated learning, to a world where learning is happening all the time. And so the whole paradigm shift is, I can't trust or rely on that as a company we are mandating this learning anymore. Because if I need my learners to be agile and responsive, we as a company are too slow. That learner on the job right now is more aware of the challenges they're facing day to day than the company is as a whole. So I need to create a learning culture where learners are learning on the fly, right? So if this is self-led, meaning learners, it's their choice about what they do, when they do it, and how much time they spend on it, then these decisions that you're making are even more important than classroom. Because if you get it wrong, then you end up with these challenges of an empty platform, wasting investments, misses the mark. That's why it's so important. Yes, it's always true for learning, but it's more true for digital because of these characteristics that I've zoomed in on here, right? But I'm not trying to scare everybody, right? There are ways to get it done right, and there's a lot of stories and cases, and one that I'll share with you of this happening well, right? So let's jump in, right? So these are the decisions that we need to make, that we make well or we don't make well, right, that will affect this. So number one, we've got to carefully decide what is the right modality, what is the right platform technology, if technology. We also need to design it effectively. What is the right way to design this? What is the right design, meaning the right format, structure, and flow? And then how am I going to engage learners? And behind that, there's these, I guess, core areas, right? When you're making these decisions, typically what's happened is a lot of people, myself included, put content in the center. Let's be honest, even though we want to say we're learner-centric, often we go and we do a needs analysis, and that needs analysis says, our people are weak with strategic thinking, or our people are not great at maintaining this part of the engine, or our people have this gap in compliance. And then you put that gap, that content in the center, and then you build around the content. But what we really need to be doing, and be very careful about the when and the why, is we need to have our business goals in the center, not just the learning goals, which I'm going to put under the outcomes, but also what culture do we need? Why do we need it? In 5 years' time, what do we need our people as learners to be doing in order to meet our business goals. What type of culture do we have today? Learning culture, company culture, and what type of learning culture do we need to have tomorrow? So right now, you might answer this question and say, we have a very traditional learning culture, a very top-down kind of approach to learning. Well, that needs to be considered when you consider your technology, when you consider your design, when you consider your learner engagement. What outcomes do I want to achieve? Right? Is this a huge mindset shift, behavior change, or am I just broadcasting some knowledge and it's not critical that everyone retains that? Well, that's going to, again, dictate and impact the technology. It's going to impact the design. It's going to impact the learner engagement. And then most importantly, the learners. Who are they? Where are they? What's their comfort level? How much time do they have? What's interesting to them? What's not interesting to them? All of these 4 areas at the top will determine why, how, and when you make decisions on the 3 things on the bottom: the technology, the learning design, and the learner engagement. I think we've got some good comments here. Adrian said, I think it starts with engagement before platform and design. Yes, it does. But to figure out what is engagement, you need to answer the top categories here. There may also be some limitations, right? We work with clients who say, we've already invested in success factors and LinkedIn Learning, but we're having trouble with it. What do we do? Okay, well, look, so we have some limitations there, but what can we do to work around those, right? And that's often where we come in. But that's what I'd like everyone to remember from this. Critical decisions need to be made. And the things that you need to consider before you make those decisions is the business, the culture, and especially the learning culture now and tomorrow, what learning outcomes you want to get towards, and who are your learners. And if you consider that properly, then you're going to make good decisions, and then you're going to start to avoid these issues from happening. Okay, let's go deeper into these 3 sections. Design and development, right? So I know I started with technology here, but I'm going to zoom in on design and development because actually design and development will come first, right? Because it's self-led, because it's micro, because it's continuous, I need to make sure that I have considered my learners, right? I need to consider these 5 key areas. So if you're going to walk away with one thing from this whole session, I'd like you to take away these 5 key critical success criteria. Number 1, ruthless relevance. If something is not relevant, people do not come back. If I need to make a chocolate cheesecake and I go to YouTube and I find a video that is for a strawberry cheesecake, it is close to being relevant. It is interesting. It is how to make a cheesecake, but it is not how do I make a chocolate cheesecake. So I do not watch that video. Your version of that at work is, I might have some content or material like a platform that we're deploying, or a technology, or an assessment tool, or maybe it's how do I manage a P&L, or how do I engage employees, or whatever it might be. So I might have content on LinkedIn Learning that is how do you manage a P&L, but it's not ruthlessly relevant until I have a layer that's built in that shows how do I manage a P&L at my company, or in my team, or in my area. So for someone, because it's self-led, remember, these learners are choosing what they do. They're choosing how much time and energy they put into it. They're choosing how distracted they become. I have to be ruthlessly relevant, and that influences my design. I have to create connections between learners, between people, between them and the content. It has to be powerful and interesting and relevant, right? I have to respect time. Right? So we have a client right now in the case study, if we have time, that we'll talk about, where we found out that at the individual contributor level, they only had up to 2 hours a week. And at the manager of manager level, they only had up to 1 hour per week. So we had to then build that into our design. And then you have to generate pull. So this is kind of talking about engagement, but all of this is talking about engagement. You can't rely in the world of modern digital with pushing people. Pushing is like sending an LMS or an email out to say, hey, everybody, join this training at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. That's push. Right? Or you have to complete this, or you will suffer some bonus or incentive issues, right? That's push. They could still be relevant here, but pull is what sucks me back into a learning. Why do I want to come back? And that could be gamification. That could be the relevance. That could be the connections. It could be because it respects my time. It could be all sorts of different things, but you have to build that in. And finally, you want to collect data. Because I want to know what's going on, when is it going on, why is it going on, and I want to be able to be actively agile, in an agile fashion, making changes to the learning experience. So how do I ensure that I'm being ruthlessly relevant, that I'm creating connections, respecting time, and generating pull? Like I know that I have folks on this call from all sorts of companies, from automotive people, banks, manufacturing facilities. I've also probably got some consultants on here as well. The answer to these questions are going to be different depending on your learners, depending on your business, depending on these categories up here, right? So if I start with my design process, and we typically lean on design thinking, and when I talk about empathizing, I'm often talking not just about the learners, I'm talking about the business, the culture, everything. Once I understand that, then I can start to define, right? What is my success criteria? How am I going to engage? What is the right platform to do this, right? And once I've done that, we typically get in a hackathon. We start to ideate, okay, let's try to visualize this. Let's build a cheap, quick prototype to test this. Let's get learners' feedback, right? And if you follow, I mean, I'm a huge fan of design thinking as a process, plus also agile development, right? Scrums, sprints, right? That's typically how we develop these. If you do this process correctly, if you build learner personas, right? If you do all of these things correctly, you will start to answer the questions. Well, because I know the learners, because I know the business, because I know the outcomes, because I know the culture in the empathize phase, I know how much time I have. I know what type of system will work or platform will work or not work. I know what relevance looks like. I know what type of data I want to collect. I know how I'm going to generate, pull, and engage. This is the center. And if you have answered these questions, you can move on to the next part, which is technology. Right, so I know we're running out of time because we started like 10 minutes late, but I'm going to accelerate through this. So hopefully you guys can stick around a little bit beyond. So now I've got my design principles right. I've got a flow. Now we go to technology, and there's a lot out there. I've just grabbed a few, right? I've got your kind of content sources in the center here, right? I've got your kind of LMSs and other platforms around that, and then I've got your kind of more progressive or more modern learning experience platforms, right, around that. And really the way the world is heading, it's not towards kind of, I've got this little GIF here, I don't know if it's going to work. That's meant to be a GIF of Gollum from Lord of the Rings holding the ring, you know, the ring of power. Forgive my geekiness here.
As a picture, it's terrifying, Ben.
Yeah, it's
but,
terrifying. I don't know.
I hope people get the reference of the one ring to rule them all. And if we obsess over that one platform and try and make everything fit, we're going to end up falling into the metaphorical lava.
Well, and what happens is both platform providers, and we partner with a whole bunch of platform providers, but platform providers, they go to a client and they say, yes, we can do all of these things, right? Or conversely, the client is looking for a platform that can do all of these things, and then they end up being brutally disappointed. And if I come back to those challenges, right, wasted investments. We've ended up invested in stuff that isn't going to take us where we need to go, or I'm trying to find one platform when in reality it is an amplification of learning that's happened here. It's going to be an ecosystem of a few different things that will create the culture and the outcomes we need. Look, I'm going to do a quick poll. So I don't know, if everyone could drop a pin, see the pin, I'm going to drop a pin myself. Drop a pin next to any of these kind of learning content platforms that you've worked with in the past or that you work with recently. We've got Paul who's worked with Udemy. We've got some people working with Skillsoft. We've got a lot of people working with LinkedIn Learning. Some folks working with Coursera. Lynda.com, you may have worked with before. LinkedIn Learning bought them. Got people in the chat, Skillsoft. So look, we got a whole bunch of people working with different platforms. So these platforms are great. These are effectively content curation platforms, if you will. And the curation aspect, meaning taking content and bringing it down to a point of relevance to me, they have varying degrees of success with them, right? So I can see you're all working with a whole bunch of platforms, but I want to ask you a question. So I'm going to open another poll. Here comes a poll, guys. Please, on a poll, what do you think is the average degree of utilization by learners in organizations, right? So how often are learners actually using these platforms? 0 to 30%, low 30 to 50, average 50 to 70, high 70 to 90, maximum 90 to 100. Go ahead, I'm going to leave this poll open for about 30 seconds. What do you think is the average utilization? And by the way, as you're answering, I tell you, this is based on data that we capture when we are managing these learning platforms or at least supporting them for other clients, right? That's where I'm getting this data from. And it's also backed up by somewhat anecdotal evidence from other partners and clients in our industry that we speak to. So I'll leave it open for another 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's close it. Let's have a look at the results. So it normally takes a second to come up, and we'll see what you guys think about this. All right, so the results are just showing up right now. Hopefully you guys can all see them. Still waiting, I guess, for a couple of people to finish clicking submit. Okay, so we've got a few people saying hi, 5% of people saying hi, 28%, 37% is in the poor to low category, and average is 23%. So look, our statistics suggest that the average utilization without optimization is typically in the sub 20% range, right? Often 17, even in the single digits when people deploy these platforms. And why is that? Because what happens is you get platforms like this pyramid, this triangle here. In the center is what they're really, really good at. So LinkedIn Learning, for example, is really, really good at hosting and displaying lots and lots of content. And then you get out to the outside of it, that they're somewhat okay. They're average at curating that content by themselves. They're not a dedicated content curation platform which can personalize learning to suck content from LinkedIn Learning and bring it out to John, who is a compliance specialist at a bank, or Michelle, who is a mechanic, an after-sales person in a dealership over in South Africa, right? They're good at one area, they're average outside of that, and then very quickly you move to the edges of their capabilities where they're really not that good, right? Or success factors, right? We're a huge partner of success factors. It's very, very good at learning compliance, tracking, reporting, scheduling, learning. It's okay at some socialization and creating learning pathways. There are other platforms that do it much better than them, right? But then you go outside of it in terms of creating cohesive learning journeys with social and gamification, all that. They're not that great at it. You can kind of jerry-rig it, but what you end up with is an experience that creates an empty platform that feels like a wasted investment and ends up missing the mark. So you have to know that there's different technologies for different solutions. So I'm going to close this off now. We're almost at the end here. So you know, what I want you to walk away from here is when you're doing your design and your development, when you're choosing your technologies, consider your business goals, your culture, your outcomes, and your learners, and that will help you determine what is the right technology, or if I even need to use technology, what's the right balance. And the last piece is learner engagement. And I know we're right at the top of the hour here. I just want to do a quick discussion in the chat. Sorry, I just saw Jeff about creating a fellowship of the learning of the ring. Yes, I think we could do that, Jeff. That's my next mission. How can you engage learners before, during, and after? What are the tools of the trade? Go ahead and in the chat, imagine you're in a modern digital, or even if you're just thinking traditionally, what are your main tools for engaging learners in digital learning? Go ahead. What are the main mechanisms? Stick it in the chat. Okay, so stories, yeah, so having the content itself be engaging. Yeah, we're using annotations in a WebEx to engage you guys. We've designed this webinar to be a virtual training because we want to walk the talk. Yeah, polls, using some fun elements. Coaching can help. Yeah, dynamic presentations, gamification can help with that. Pictures, anecdotes, yeah, it's got to be interactive. Using a range of digital tools. I totally agree with that. There's all sorts of tools and platforms that have different applications for engagement. Yeah, changing the state, right? Disrupting the flow of things. A lot of these are classroom-centric, but some of these are webinar-centric. Storytelling, look, storytelling is definitely coming up a lot, and it's something that's applicable in traditional, but storytelling applies to digital as well. Role plays, whether it's online or live, capturing feedback, pre and post work. Great contribution, Michelle. I totally agree. Create buzz. Thank you, Peggy. Marketing and communications skyrocket up the level of importance if you're trying to do change management. So look, keep on typing in the chat in here, but I'm going to show you some kind of top tips. Okay. Number one, your number one tool for engagement on digital is to follow the success criteria that I gave you. Your first step is to creating engagement is to be ruthlessly relevant, is to create connections, is to respect people's time, is to generate pull, and really to generate pool parties where we're going to deep dive into now. And the collection of data will help you track how effective your engagement is. So number one is follow those success criteria. If you're finding that your learners aren't participating, you can probably go back and point to different success criteria you may not be meeting. You can probably look at your current programs that are having varying degrees of success and measure them against this, and measure them against these elements here. And you'll probably, if you're honest, find that there's some gaps. Consider change management, right? So if I look at my organization and realize, hey, you know what? This bank, like a case study, we're going to talk about a bank that just had never done digital before. They wanted to go from super traditional learning, super top-down hierarchical approach to learning, to all of a sudden self-led, stretched digital experience. There was change management involved in that, and not just in the learners, but the stakeholders, everybody, right? So there's all sorts of stuff we did to address that. But for example, one of the things we made a decision on based on that was that we were going to kick off this digital experience with a classroom, a one-day classroom or a half-day classroom. And the whole goal of that, the reason why we were investing that money into that was because there was a fear in the organization that people wouldn't participate. So then we made a decision to have a classroom that gave people access to the platform, that sold them and why they're so important. So there's a lot around change management. You build change management into your first designs, right? And you decide on how much change management is needed through your empathizing phase by understanding your business and your learners. You've got to leverage subject matter experts and moderators. So moderators are your learning engagement specialists. So whether it's, I know that, we do work with different automotive companies, and they are looking at blending virtual training, in dealership training, ongoing continuous learning. Well, if you just rely on the systems, and once you let learners go back to work, they're going to get really busy. You've got to have some ways to pull them back in, right? So having those subject matter experts be engaged strategically throughout, in different ways that are supported by the technology, that are supported by the learners, and moderators who go in and checking in who's on, who's off. What are people talking about? Has someone raised a good question? Can I take that good question or that great contribution from this learner and show it to all the other learners to suck them in, right? So SMEs and moderators, before they were just in a classroom or in coaching, but now they need to be involved in the digital component as well. Use gamification, but use it smartly, right? Don't have silly games in content that isn't meant to be silly, but do use tracking, badges, points accruals. Not every platform has that. So if you're saying to yourself, I don't have gamification in my extended stretch learning experience, you need to kind of ask yourself, have I made the right technology choices to create that opportunity? Someone's asked a question around what is the right number of participants? There is no right answer to that. That is determined by assessing, what do I need to achieve? Who are these learners? What learning outcomes are there? What is the business readiness? What technology do I have? We have developed a leadership program for a large pharmaceutical company that has 5,000 learners in a single leadership experience, including skills building, feedback, on-the-job work, right? That's a 3-month experience, but stretched out every week, releases new content only 1 to 2 hours per week, right? But if you throw 5,000 learners onto a virtual instructor-led training in 2 hours, and you expect them to somehow learn something, then you're going to face challenges. So it's all about that balance of design, which is why I left this stuff to the end. Because once I know I've got my design right, I've empathized with my audience and my business and my culture, and I'm thinking about engagement, I'm thinking about technology together, so I can make sure I've got the right balances. Make it diverse and appropriate. You guys said that, right? Make it diverse, but also appropriate to the level, right? And appropriate to the audience and what the content is, right? But definitely it's got to be diverse. It can't just be video, or classroom, or read an article, read, discuss. It's got to have some variance, the same way that I would if I was on social media, or the same way that I search the internet. It's a mix of reading, watching, consuming, contributing. That's kind of how it is. Building content capture. Here's a top tip. When you're designing your learning, build in opportunities to capture learners' experiences so you can use those videos or those contributions as marketing for future learners, for change management. We often build in videos where learners share, what did you learn? What did you go do differently? And what's your advice to future learners? And we get their permission to then make marketing videos to then send that to the rest of the business. And when we've done that, we've gone from struggling to get 90 learners in a class that we wanted 300 to now the third or fourth run, we overflows. We've got 450 learners, right, in a 3-month experience, and we have to flow them onto the next session. And that was because of all the cool marketing and the word of mouth that occurred around it. Make sure it's social. All right, build in some degree of social and also herd mentality. Leverage the fact that people move together. Gamification and using gamification to create accountability creates a herd mentality. Oh, everyone else is earning score. I've got to earn that score. Everyone else's score is at 1,000. I'm not at 1,000. I need to get in there, right? So herd mentality is a great psychological tool to get people engaged. And finally, make it living and breathing, meaning these should not be static experiences. We should capture feedback, and we should be feeding that back into the experiences on a regular basis, either on the fly in the moment or during key review cycles, depending on the type of learning. So look, we've zoomed out and we've spoken about digital broadly. My plan is that I would like to run a dedicated session into each of those 3 areas: learning platforms and ecosystems, digital learning and digital design, really breaking down that design process, and then also one around driving adoption and learning engagement. So I'm going to do a quick poll now, and I want to hear from you guys. What would you like the next webinar to be on? And we're going to deep dive into these areas. And the most responses will be our next one. Second most will be our third following one, and so on and so forth. So go ahead, tell us what is it you'd like to deep dive on. And if we can, we're going to try to run these. 2 weeks is short notice, but we're going to try to run them fairly quickly. So, but we want to focus on what's important, what's really the pressure point for you guys right now. So go ahead, tell us in your poll.
It's really interesting, Ben, to see this poll moving forwards, and we've been neck and neck on 2 of the options.
Right.
It'll be really interesting to see where we finish up at. And we've got about 65% of people have finished the poll. So
yep, we'll close it in 10 seconds.
Majority. Yep.
Please don't give us equal responses. Then I'm going to have to just make
it's really tight, Ben. It's going to be on a knife edge, I think.
Okay. And guys, look, while you're filling out that poll, I'm going to stop for Q&A, and I'll stay on. I know we've ran over, but I'm going to stay on for Q&A afterwards.
I'm just going to answer very quickly Catherine Berry's question. Yes, this webinar is recorded and will be available on demand. So Catherine, if you missed the start, yes. Because you are on, you have obviously registered, you will receive a link to the recording, and we will be putting it up on our website and make it freely available. So the recording will be available. Right,
and guys, just quickly before, and guys, just in the spirit of recordings, we have, oh God, it's close. We have a recording from our last webinar about specifically designing virtual instructor-led trainings, which there's a recording of, which we can send out to everybody if you missed the last session. It was very much like this, informative. All right, so the poll results. Learning platforms and technologies, only 8%. Modern digital learning design, 40%. And driving adoption and learning engagement, 47%. So our next webinar will be on driving adoption, which will include change management, but then also around learner engagement. And we're going to share some stories about that. Then our following webinar will be on the design process, design thinking, agile, and real situations and decisions that were made based on that. Because I've got some here, but I'm not going to have time. And we will still run one on learning platforms because there's a whole art to building an ecosystem, right? The layers of learning. And a lot of people ignore this and they just go in haphazardly into technology. But I really we will still run a webinar on this and talk about how you create these layers and what affects the decision making and how you make it a simple and easy process for learners. So, and we'll even break down some of technologies we use, such as Intrepid, LMSs and the role they play, some more gamification elements for technical training, elements for video, for live or remote video feedback and review, also chatbots, we'll look at all of that stuff to talk about how that fits in. So thank you guys. In this webinar today, I wanted to kind of talk about these benefits of digital, right? That if you do it right, you can achieve these cool benefits of bringing learning together, making it more effective, stretching it out over time, and making your organization more agile and responsive to change by creating a learning organization where learners take ownership of their own development. But there are some challenges, right? Empty platforms, wasted investments, missing the mark. That's where a lot of these land. And behind that is what causes these or what avoids these is what, when, and why you make decisions around technology the way you design it, and also how you're going to engage your learners. Above all of that, though, is knowing your business goals, your culture and outcomes, and learners, the learner preferences. That's going to influence making good decisions. So, gosh, it was a bit of a rush there. I apologize, but I want to pause there for you guys to ask some questions. And if you have to drop off, I understand. But thank you so much, guys, for your time. I've got a question actually in from Raul. Do you think blend of physical and digital is right approach? Raul, it's a good question. And I would say this not just about physical and digital. I would say this about anything. If you go through your analysis process and you realize that this can only be achieved through classroom or virtual is going to lend itself very well to something, then yes is the answer. But if you look at this and you think, you know what, I've looked at what we need to achieve here and I don't think live or physical is necessary, then great, reinvest that money into creating a more comprehensive digital experience. You know, so there's no one answer to it, but I can tell you that a blend of both digital and classroom together can be amazing because those classroom experiences leverage having a facilitator and what benefit that brings. Being live in the room with a facilitator, that has certain benefits. And if they've done all the learning beforehand and afterwards, then they can really just focus on getting the most out of that time. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I can see lots of thank you coming in. Yeah, any other questions? Feel free to hit us with them. Yeah, digital is a new way of normal. How do we drive this to our stakeholders? Look, it is difficult, and I struggle with that, to be frank, because, you know, from the outside, looking in at a client's business, you've got limited access. But what we've done in the past with our clients who have faced this challenge, where we've had deep partnerships, is we've engaged the critical stakeholders or people who wouldn't normally be involved in the design process in a hackathon, where they get to go in and be a part of the prototyping process and get a real gut feeling. They get an emotional feeling of what digital can be. And that helps change their minds. So that's one little tip. I've got a question from Abe talking about the design thinking steps. Hey, Abe, I intentionally, and this is not the design thinking call, but in our next session, we will deep dive into it in the design process, which I believe will be the next the second webinar after this. But just to answer your question, empathize is all about basically analysis, really understanding not just basic stuff like what are my learners' needs or issues, but going deeper and understanding who are they, where do they learn, what connectivity do they have, but also business empathy, right? What is the culture of that company? What's the level of readiness? What is the resistance? And then taking that and then going in and say, based on what we know, let's define it. Now, true design thinking is actually about defining problems that that maybe there is not even a problem statement yet, right? But what we use it for is to then defining the learning parameters. Probably this is a better slide. What are our criteria? What technology will best meet these learners where they're at? What content? Let's define the content. Sometimes the content itself changes based on the results of the empathizing stage. Then you go in and ideate. How are we going to bring all of this together? And we usually typically do this in a hackathon, the initial round of ideation, but it's an ongoing process. And then you build and test. So we quickly prototype what could this look like and go and test that so we can be very fast with our decisions and also manage risk of investment. So that's the design thinking process. And after we move through that initial phase, we've got a clear idea. We go into an agile development, building and testing and prototyping, quick 2-week sprints to get there. Vipin's asked for some real examples. We will have real examples in the deep dive sessions, okay?
Yeah, and I will just add, I've on that design thinking note, I have added a link into the chat to all attendees for our microsite on design thinking. So if you're relatively new to design thinking and you want to get a bit of an idea of how it pertains to learning, do click on that link, and there is a video on each of the sections, and we have some good examples in there as well. So good opportunity.
I can't see that link, Oliver. Did you send that to all participants?
To all attendees, yeah.
Okay, all attendees. Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah. So it's gone to the attendees, not to you, Ben. I know you've already got it. Just very quickly before we finish the session, a couple of questions that have gone into the Q&A box.
Oh, right. Okay.
We had one question on what is the difference between e-learning and on-the-job learning. While the on-the-job learning is most impactful to other, sorry, I'm not sure I'm reading this correctly. Generally, organization follows the 70-20-10 as experience, expertise, and education model. I think this is a good question, but I think one of the first things we need to do, Ben, is really work on that definition, because for us, e-learning is something that we would see as more of a kind of read or watch, click, and then answer quiz.
Yeah. E-learning is typically, we would consider as a SCORM package, right? It's a package of a consolidated, housed, single e-learning package that resides in your LMS that learners access, that has a finite finish and endpoint, typically runs for 30 to 60 minutes and involves a consumption of knowledge and maybe a knowledge check, right? So that's an e-learning by our definition. E-learning might be a part of a wider digital experience. You know, so that's kind of how we.
And in answer to that, sort of, if we change that word e-learning to digital learning and on-the-job learning, I mean, I think one of the beauties of digital learning is, depending on the process that you go through design, you can really kind of phase it into on-the-job learning, so it can become a part of the experience. You know, just-in-time learning can be managed through digital resources. And you can actually really help to bolster that 70% of the 70-20-10 rule, rather than just sort of sitting on that 10%. So that would be one of the things that I would add there.
70-20-10 is still fine, right? 70-20-10 sits within the design prowess, but the design criteria, right? But ultimately, you know, you're letting what the business needs, what the learners need, determine. You know, most of the learning happens on the job. So if you have micro learning and people are going in and consuming like 10 minutes of content a day, they're giving space. And so what we'll often do is we'll have missions or projects that relate to that content. So they've given space to reflect on it, right? And go out and deploy just that small 1 or 2 hours of content they've consumed in the whole week, right? And they have space to go and take action on the job in a way that's relevant to them. So it also feeds into the answer to this other question, you know, how, you know, can we make micro learning more experiential? Well, and make it more effective, honestly. You know, what I've got here, you know, if micro learning is ruthlessly relevant, if it feels like it's connected to others and to the content itself, if I've respected people's time, if I've got the right layers to pull people in and engage, and reviewing the data and making agile updates, that is one of the keys. These things are the foundation of creating a successful micro learning, stretched learning experience. So that's the center of it. We will go deeper into effective through the engagement side of it
Absolutely.
later.
And Ben, I think maybe if we keep going for just a couple more minutes on some of these questions, I see still we've got a large number of our participants still holding on with us. And again, it will be recorded, so we'll be able to use that. One of the questions I see, which is perhaps something that we'll be covering in our our third session, is from Jermaine. How do we continue learning post a session? Even with face-to-face models, it is often difficult to keep the learning alive post a program, and also measuring ROI. And I think you're on the right slide for this one, Ben.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's no one answer, right? Because different blends of modalities and technologies, different desired learning outcomes and learning environments will be different, right? But there's lots of cool. Technology is really great at this, right? So we have a number of experiences, but one that comes to mind is it's a 12-week learning experience. So it's a 12-week learning experience, no more than 1.5 hours per week. Each activity within that 1.5 hours is 2 to 5 minutes long, right? And it's a whole range of modalities. It's designed using these criteria that we mentioned here, but there's like polls and videos to watch and articles and discussions and missions that on the job, you know. So first answer is, to making learning go on to the job, is to stretch that initial learning phase into a longer, like look at the initial learning itself and ask yourself, do I really need to hit them within 1 or 2 days and run that risk of bombarding them with too much information? Okay, so step number 1 is look at that learning. How can I stretch that learning itself to give people time to learn, to reflect and take action on piece by piece, rather than hitting everything and letting them figure out how to take action? So that's step 1. Step 2 is, so let's say I don't do that and I've just got a 2-day classroom. We've been really successful in using some tools like QStream, using Mobile Coach, using some other learning platforms that create an environment where learners stay connected, and they pump out questions and some little interactions, and based on their answers, they can be fed other updates and information. And this, tied in with learning alumni and learning communities, can be really, really powerful tool to create a continuous learning environment. So
And I would say there's also there's very low budget options as well. If you don't have budget to engage a specific tool or something like that, if you take these principles, these critical success criteria into account when you're building, and if you really sort of think about from the learner experience perspective, we've seen measurable success from simple things like email challenges that come out after a session that might remind people, hey, go and do this, go and try this tool. Have you applied this? And feedback. Stuff that as learning professionals in our own organizations, we can maybe engage with however it is we're already connecting. Maybe you're already engaged with Yammer or another collaboration tool. Perhaps you can utilize that to create a community. There are loads of things that you can do that don't require spending money or buying new things. So I love this.
Yes and no.
Ecosystem.
I want to be a little bit contrarian here and say, ultimately, learners, when they leave the learning environment, will be at the mercy of their job, and people prioritize what's important to them. So if the emails are in the right wording and it's something that if someone finds to be ruthlessly relevant and super interesting, then yes, they will look at those emails and they will take that action. But I mean, what I'm trying to get at here is that actually the technology is what takes what was once a nice idea but was difficult to execute because of a whole range of things and helps you package them together in a way that actually drives the adoption, that it's easier to engage people, that it's easier to create social communities, that it's easier to pump little tiny bits of learning to people continuously than what it was before. So yes, you can use those tools, but traditionally those tools by themselves have not always led to an engagement that people would want, right? And so yes, you should do whatever you can to maintain the learning experience, but there are some very, very cheap tools out there that can help augment that can create a continuous gamification layer, or that can create a means to create a more adaptive learning experience where I'm pulsing out what are their needs and giving them content based on that. So there's lots of cool things. Some are very expensive enterprise level solutions, and some are more kind of user-based license solutions. So look, it's a complex answer. Finding the right balance will not be determined by the technology. It will be determined by the answer to these questions, right? The business goals, the culture, the outcomes, and the learners.
Absolutely. So Ben, I see that we've still got lots of questions coming in. I think we could be at it all day. I've got to admit, I think this is giving us food for a good follow-up email with answers to these questions, as well as food for our future webinars and podcasts, etc. So okay. I think we're going to have to wrap it up. And appreciate, we've got so many participants who have stayed on well past the allotted time today, and we thank you for your interest, and we'll do our best to get to all of those questions in a follow-up.
So Oliver, let me just close on one little thing.
Absolutely.
One little activity for everyone who's still on. When you go back to work, especially if you're on, client side, corporate side, go back and look at some of the initiatives that perhaps you weren't super excited about, or some concerns you have around, I'm worried about people turning up, and give it the test. Go back and look, did it meet these successful criteria? Root, relevance, connection, time, generating, pool, and collecting data. And did we really think about, did we make the critical decisions at the right time for the right reasons relating to our business goals, our culture? Do that test. Go back and have that conversation internally. And I promise you, just that conversation alone will empower you guys to go out and make some really successful decisions moving forward. So I just wanted to kind of finish on that, and also just say thank you for everyone's time. Excited to get on the next session where we're going to deep dive into these topics further.
Fantastic. So once again, I want to take a moment to thank all of our participants for getting involved and for being highly interactive. We've got some great information in the chat, some great shares, some really interesting results to our polling questions, as well as just a great interactive and friendly session from everybody. And we really appreciate that from everyone who's joined us today. I'd also like to take a moment to thank both Ben for taking us through this informative session, and the whole GP Strategies panel who have made this possible, working tirelessly behind the scenes to deal with the technology and make sure everything runs smoothly. So once again, I'd like to thank everybody and look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks when we have our next session which will be on the topic of learner adoption and engagement. Correct, Ben? As decided by the people on this.
The people have
webinar.
spoken.
The people have
We live
spoken.
in a democracy. Yep.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Ben, and wishing everybody a great second half to the week.
Thanks, guys. Good luck, and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.